So with that being said, I am super excited to introduce our first speaker of the night. So our first speaker is Erin Burry, and here are 3 things that you probably don't know about Erin. So Erin broke both her legs when she was 9 years old in a tire swing accident. She has traveled to 6 continents, 4 in 2019 alone. And her favorite movie franchise is The Fast and the Furious. Rest in peace, Paul Walker. Erin, come on up here and share your fuck up.
Thank you, Marcia. If you don't like The Fast and the Furious, I don't know what to say. Very excited to be here tonight to share my F up. I'm not actually going to say the F word because in my house, my mom considers crap a bad word, and I know this is going on the internet, so I won't give her an early heart attack. I will just call it my biggest F up. My biggest F up started when I was 23 years old and I got my first job at a startup. I was about a year out of school, and I was hired as the second employee at a company called Sprouter, which was, thank you, Vince, whom I used to work with there and now works at Shopify. One person remembers it. And I was hired as the marketing lead, and really I was the marketing budget. And yes, this is a real photo of our team, not a photo from the canceled CSI Toronto. But being the marketing budget and being tasked with growing this social network for entrepreneurs meant that I was going out to a ton of events. I was saying yes to every coffee invite and, opportunity to get in front of a group of entrepreneurs to talk to them. I was traveling to exotic places like Paris for conferences and to the North York Library. I said yes to everything and was out all the time, 3 or 4 nights a week, probably like many of you who are in your first or second or even 5th job, you feel a compulsion to kind of say yes to everything. And like the freshman 15 kind of creeps up on you in first year and you don't realize until your parents see you at Thanksgiving that something's wrong, I did not see burnout sneaking up on me. I think a lot of people think of burnout as this big moment, this panic attack when they pass out or, have a freak out. And for me, it was just kind of a slow build of being go, go, go for so long and then finally waking up one day and just realizing that I had no hobbies outside of work, unless you count watching Vin Diesel movies. And I hadn't seen my friends that much because I was so busy integrating myself into the startup community where, of course, I made lots of new friends. And it was just this really good reminder that I needed to slow down, get some hobbies, and I said to myself, I'm going to be more cognizant in the future of using my time strategically. I was saying yes to everything, which was, in effect, not actually a good use of my time because I was saying yes to a lot of things that weren't actually valuable for me personally or professionally. So fast forward a decade, and last fall in 2018, by that time I was running a communications and branding agency. This is my team and I at my wedding in October, and it was leading up to my wedding. I was running the agency full-time as my day job. I was running a side hustle that I started with these 2 ladies right here, a bicycle wine tour company in Prince Edward County that I somehow thought would be able to just fit in neatly on the side. And I was doing professional public speaking to make money because apparently weddings are expensive, especially when you insist on having yours at Casa Loma. And a mentor of mine scheduled a meeting with me probably about a month before the wedding. And I thought she had a potential client opportunity for me. But when she sat me down, she said, actually, Erin, this is an intervention. I've seen photos of you lately and you look exhausted. You are at way too many events, you are doing too many things, and you don't have to prove anything to anybody, and you need to focus because there's no way that you're doing everything that you're trying to do, both personally and professionally, really well. And at first I wanted to be like, what? But then I said, this is a gift. It takes a lot of guts to sit someone down and tell them they look tired and that they need to slow down. But unfortunately, I was already on the train of events, and so I couldn't really get off. So I found myself the week before my wedding speaking at 2 out-of-town events I hosted a tech event a night before the rehearsal dinner, and the only reason I didn't travel to Halifax to speak at an event 3 days before the wedding was because my husband, who has much more common sense than I do, said, "Absolutely not, are you insane?" And what should have been this really exciting, relaxing week was so slammed that we had to hire an officiant to come to my agency's office and legally marry us, because our actual officiant was a friend, because I couldn't make the time to go to City Hall and to actually go get married. They had to come to me, and it was more romantic than it sounds to get married at your office. So my F-up tonight is that I'm confessing that I am a serial overcommitter who has a huge problem with saying no, both to personal and professional things. And I'd like to say that I'm a reformed serial overcommitter, but that would just be a straight up lie. Just like it's a lie to say that the Fast and Furious franchise is not the best movie franchise of all time. Thank you, sir. Okay. So earlier this year, about 6 months into our marriage, my husband and I decided to become co-founders of Willful. And you might think that being newlyweds and coworkers is the F-up that I'm here to talk about tonight. We do enjoy working together at least about 80% of the time. So I joined the company in April, and we were soon presented with an opportunity to move to Montreal and to join a startup accelerator called Founder Fuel. And when you decide to move to Montreal, you tell all your friends and family, and they're all really excited, because who doesn't love Montreal in the summer? So I, being the serial overcommitter that I am, agreed to host 8 sets of family and friends in a row, 8 weekends in a row, before I had even left for Montreal. So we got there, and we're participating in the Startup Accelerator program, and the programming was at least 10 to 20 hours a week. Then I was trying to run the business, which was in startup mode, attend events in the Montreal startup scene, and then every Friday at 5 p.m., play hostess until Sunday afternoon, and then try to get 3 hours of alone time. And one Friday morning, I woke up and burst into tears, and I'm not a crier unless we're talking about Christmas Hallmark movies or award show speeches, or Paul Walker in Fast and Furious 7. But I was just like, how did I get here again? 10 years ago, I saw what overcommitting does and what burnout does, and now I'm sitting here, and it's not that I didn't want these lovely people to come visit me. I swear, it wasn't that you were coming. It was just that I was so mad at myself because I was the only one that was saying yes. My husband would sit next to me and say, just wait till we get to Montreal. Don't commit to that thing. Don't say yes to catching up with that old acquaintance. And I was just so mad that was and still am, my own worst enemy. And it got me thinking a lot about why I have so much trouble saying no. And I've thought about this a lot over the years because I struggle with it so much. And I think it boils down to 2 things. Professionally, the first reason is because when you are just starting out in the tech industry, everyone is so nice. Everyone you ask to go for coffee says yes. Everyone is willing to let you pick their brain. And I feel like a lot of people showed me kindness when I was early in my career. So to get to a place where I'm a decade into my career and to say no to those same requests just feels like I'm not paying it forward in the way that I should be. And then the second reason is that I feel like I've invested a lot of time in building a reputation as someone who's helpful, who gives back, who's kind, who's a good friend and family member. And saying no just feels like the antithesis of that. I'm scared that people will think I'm too important for them, or I don't have time for them, or that I'm a bitch, or that I'm very unhelpful. So it often ends up with me prioritizing everyone else over myself. And I know that I'm not alone. I know there are probably some of you in the audience who are thinking, yeah, I also hate saying no. And I saw this tweet a few weeks ago as I was preparing for this talk from local entrepreneur Huda Idris, where she asks about whether there's a class you can take on how to say no without feeling like an asshole, because if so, she would take that class in a heartbeat. And I, of course, enthusiastically replied, as did many others. In fact, Tim Ferriss has an episode of his very popular podcast all about the topic of how to say no elegantly. And in his book, Tribe of Mentors, he interviews over 100 really successful people about how they say no. And it was actually comforting to read that book because at least half of those people said, Well, I don't know how to say no. Do you have any advice for me? I haven't figured it out along the way. So I know it's something we all struggle with, and I've come up with a rubric of how to hopefully make it easier to evaluate whether you want to do something or should, and how to save yourself from yourself and say no. So hopefully it's helpful to any of you out there who also struggle with it. The first thing to do when evaluating something, whether it's a personal request to go for coffee or catching up with an acquaintance or working on a work project, is to ask yourself a few questions. Do I want to do this? And will I want to do this on the day it happens? Because it's very easy to agree to catch up with someone or to participate in something 2 months down the line, but the day comes and inevitably you just want to curl up with Netflix. Is this actually going to help me or my company personally or professionally? A lot of times we say yes to things, and it actually would be better for us to spend our time staying at the office or recharging so that we're our best selves in our personal and professional lives. Is it lucrative? Completely fine to do something just because it pays the bills or gives you a little extra FU money, completely fine. And the best way to test whether you want to do something is to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, but take out 7. Because if it's an 8, 9, 10, that's a hell's yes. And if it's a 6 or below, that's a hell's no. 7 is usually where I say yes to things, and then later I'm like, really wish I hadn't agreed to this. And one thing that I've done is I've tried to save myself from myself because I know that it's my own fault that I agree to all of these things. And so I've actually created a series of canned responses in my Gmail with all of my various no's. No, unfortunately, I can't speak at that event. No, unfortunately, I can't meet for coffee right now because I'm prioritizing Willful, but feel free to reach back out in a couple months. And every single time I send one of these emails, I have a mix of guilt, because I feel like I'm letting someone down, and fear that they're going to respond negatively. But in my experience, people have understood. They know that people are busy. They know that just because they put a request out into the ether doesn't mean that you're going to say yes. And overwhelmingly, the people who do want to follow up do in a few months. And then because of their persistence, you're probably going to make time for them no matter what. So hopefully the story of my, still to this day, my huge problem with overcommitting and saying yes to everything has made you think a little bit more about your own use of the word no. In my opinion, self-care is a huge trend in 2019, and saying the word no in a professional and personal capacity and freeing up your own time is the best thing that you can do for yourself. Thank you for listening.
Awesome, Erin. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I feel like that's so relatable to anybody here in this audience, whether you're a young professional or an entrepreneur. I think there's this quote, and I don't know if I'm remembering it correctly, but it goes something like, you could do anything, but you can't do everything.
No, I think I would do anything for love, but I won't do that.
Or that, yeah, that's a good one too. But really, prioritizing your time is so important, and self-care is so important. So thank you so much for sharing that story.
Thank you for having me.
And let's open it up to some Q&A for Erin. So when you ask your question, make sure that the question itself is brief so that we can get through as many as possible.
So which is the best Fast and Furious movie?
Yeah.
Which is Fast 5.
Yeah, okay. Hey, so I'm over here.
Thank you.
So not going to talk about Fast and Furious, but so you mentioned that the first time it hit you was in your 20s and then you had to scale back. So how exactly did you do that in your 20s? Because you kind of were like, yeah, I was fine, and then I got back to it in my 30s. So what did you do for the rest of your 20s that got you where you were in your 30s? If that makes sense.
Great question. So I think I realized that saying yes, you could be strategic about saying yes. So for example, I would go on meetup.com and find any event that had an entrepreneur at it and go to it. It doesn't make sense to go to an event with 10 people that's in Scarborough that takes up 5 hours of your night and there's 8 people in attendance. It makes sense to go to something like this where there's a lot of people, you can have a lot of conversations with people. And I also realized that the best way to strategically grow my company's brand wasn't to attend events and shake hands with people one by one. It was to figure out how to get up here. So I actually invested time in learning public speaking, in practicing that, in getting over the nerves that I still have every single time. And I focused on how can I actually get in front of larger audiences of people. And I think this is just a fundamental marketing rule. It's always easier to market through partnerships or through existing communities than one-to-one and slowly building that audience. So as a journalism grad, I started writing for publications and trying to find my way in to get exposure that way. I spent time learning more about public speaking and practicing, and literally starting with 5-person workshops at the North York Library and working my way up till somehow people wanted to pay me to come and speak to them. And I think that was really the shift. It was, instead of being an attendee, how do I make sure that everyone leaves an event knowing my name and the company name, and also not just saying yes to anything and everything, but saying yes to the things that were strategic and that would have the most value for me, both personally and professionally. Thank you for the question.
What advice would you give for people who are living in a who are living in a contradiction where sorry, I'm kind of nervous.
That's okay. Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous. No judgment here.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah. So there are some people like me who, in their professional lives, they want to say yes, but in their personal lives, they want to say no. So for those types of people living in that contradictory, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. We've all been invited to like the baby shower or like third 3.5-year birthday party or whatever, all of those things on weekends. I actually saw Nora, a friend of mine who runs an HR consultancy called Bright and Early. She tweeted yesterday about how she was giving her team a vibe day off, which was just a random Thursday off where they could do whatever they wanted that filled their cup back up personally or professionally. Because she said on weekends, we often have all of these obligations with our families and friends that we can't really say no to. I think the challenge is that often, this was true for me, I didn't grow up in an entrepreneurial household, so the startup community was so foreign to a lot of my family members, especially, my Aunt Linda, who, taught Latin, like literally that's how far she is from knowing the tech startup world. And I think you just have to be honest and upfront. Here's, where my priorities are right now. Here's how I'm going to be spending my time for the next little while, and here's why. I'm really investing in my career so that I can be X, Y, Z. So if I say no to you, it's not because I don't value our relationship. It's not because I don't want to spend time with you. I'm saying no to this so I can say yes to myself and my career, and also understand that they'll probably not even notice that you're not at that party, because if you're there, you're going to be standing in the corner angrily wishing that you weren't, and you're probably not going to add a lot when you do say yes. So I think it's about being open and upfront and saying to people, here's why I can't have you come to Montreal this weekend, because I'm just spent and I'm not going to be a very good guest. Hopefully that's helpful, but it's hard with family.
Awesome. So we'll do 2 more questions.
Hi, I'm Marley. I want to know, your first time around in your 20s, how did you start to realize that you were burning out?
It's a great question. I think if anyone was here when Sarah Stockdale gave her talk or watched her talk about, she literally had a panic attack on the street getting into an Uber on the way to a client meeting and blacked out for hours. And when she came to, she was like, I guess I'm burnt out. I think for me, it was more of a slow burn. It really was one of those things where, someone that loses 80 pounds and you don't notice because you see them every day, and then everyone else is like, how could you not notice? It kind of came to a point where I realized that I had no hobbies. Like, other people were doing music lessons and, pursuing other things. And I'm like, all I do is work and go to startup events and sleep. That's weird. And I was just exhausted. I feel like it just kind of piles up on you, and you just operate like most of us probably are. It's Thursday night. We've been powering through, didn't get enough sleep the last couple nights, but it's okay because it's Friday tomorrow. We'll sleep in on Saturday, and then we'll do it all again. And then I think you just get to a point, and everyone knows themselves, but I just got to a point where I was like, I can't. It was like I was physically allergic to going out to a networking event. I'm like, I can't go to an event and introduce myself, and I just needed to take a bit of a break from that. So I would say it wasn't like some lightning bolt from the heavens. It was more so just feeling like ill about having to do some of the professional things that were expected of me, and just kind of being mad at myself for saying like I'm not even, like Netflix didn't even exist then, so I didn't even have the excuse of watching Netflix all the time. Like I just didn't do anything productive, and I didn't want to be that kind of human who just worked all the time and had nothing to show for it. So I took guitar lessons. Productive. Now I just watch Netflix.
Okay, we'll do
There's
one last question.
But I'll be around after if anyone has extra questions.
Hi. What would you say was your most painful no?
Oh my goodness. That's a really good one. I think my most painful no, and I'm not just saying this because they're here in the audience tonight, but one of my hardest no's was the side hustle that we all run together, two of my best friends and I, the county wine tours. Earlier this year, when I joined Willful, I knew that it would be a crazy time. We were doing the Startup Accelerator, somehow said yes to 8 weekends of visitors, but I had the foresight to say, I'm not gonna have time during our busy summer season to be working on this, so I had to go to Jen and Sheba and say, you guys, I love this business and I love you, but I took on too much. I can't be there for the business this year, and so we have to figure out some sort of solution where either we're getting some external help or where you guys are taking extra money in dividends at the end of the year for doing more work. And I think that was hard because I love the business and I love working with them. I just knew that I wouldn't be able to give it 100%, and luckily they were very understanding and we're not mad at all, which is usually what happens when you say no. People respond much more delightfully than you would have expected, and if not, you don't want them in your life anyways. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you again, Erin.